But for me, the core of the film is, and these two additional media, rests on what is a revolutionary. And they are a bunch of zeros. You'll notice that Nada comes from Denver. What do we know about him? Nothing. What do we know about his history? Just that there was some vague threat from his father. And of course, when we move into The Dark Knight, it's important to remember that, right? A vague threat from the father. A threat with a razor blade to cut him, right? You have the parental authority trying to push him towards something. But in general, he's a blank slate. He comes from nowhere. He has no connections. He has no history. He has no direction. He's a void. And you'll notice in the credits, he's literally called Nada, which is Spanish for nothing. Right? And you'll notice he starts off buying into, he, more than anyone else, buys into the American dream, right? He essentially says a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, right? Which has been the trade unionist call for all of history. But by being this void, right, he is able to mirror and respond to the concrete conditions presented to him, right? He is willing to work with the workers. He is willing to become a part of the community. But then also he's willing to investigate, right, the revolutionary movement that is occurring in the church. And in examining it, he becomes a mirror and reciprocal, this sort of object that sort of lodges itself in the revolutionary movement, right? But in himself, right, he never properly joins it. He never properly connects with it, but rather he is just this empty, radically empty subjectivity that is constantly intervening through the course of the film. And it's worth noting, right, Marx said that what are the proletariat but substanceless subjectivity, right? You are stripped by capital, right, to nothing. And for anything else that he has, right, or any of the workers have, so initially he is the zero. But you'll notice Frank becomes a zero as well. Throughout, right, Frank had a good job in Detroit, he had a family, he's got kids, right? But upon his ideological awakening, he's willing to risk everything. He becomes nothing else but the mirror and the revolutionary struggle, right? He becomes a void. And you'll notice he doesn't buy in to the other classes, right? You have the liberal capitalist, the left liberal capitalist, who in the end is nothing but someone to betray the movement. You obviously have the creatures, who are obviously capitalists, right? Who are feeding off of us. They're international or intergalactic free traders, right? They view us as the third world. Again, right? The proletarianization of the people. But and this is also an important side note. It's also worth noting that the lumpen proletariat, right? The criminal class, the hobos, where they're not workers, right? Because Frank is in a shanty town as well. He lives there. He lives there with a bunch of other people. And implicitly a bunch of, if you notice the ethnicity, a lot of Mexicans, and implicitly migrant workers. He himself is a diminished, financially, not in any other sense, right, proletariat. And so he is thrown into and out of labor, into and out of work. But then you have the lumpen proper, right, the raspy voiced guy who is, you know, critical of any of the ideology that comes on the television, that thinks it's a joke. And not only that, begins to characterize the very revolutionary movement, right, as a bunch of people going crazy that happens at the end of the century. And so the lesson that we need to draw from this is the lumpen proletariat, rather than being the enemy, are in fact the secret allies of the capitalist class. And it's worth noting that throughout history, most of the right-wing dictatorships are established with the aid of simultaneously the elites, but also the lumpen class, the thugs, right? The Nazi SA, right, the stormtroopers, were mostly thugs, less workers, right? The workers tended towards the social democratic movement. Same sort of thing going on in Italy, under Mussolini. The squadristis were out of work, ex-military, who basically were thugs and engaged in all sorts of criminal enterprises. So in this case, we should, again, look at the hero's position. He doesn't buy in to the easy life offered to him by the capitalist, right, to be bought off. And so in this case, right, they become a zero. They become nothing but the actual evident revolution. The sort of position, or the next movie that I'm sure you're all familiar with is The Dark Knight. And in this you have the Joker, who again has no past, right? He's always telling somebody some different past that he has, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where he came from. The only thing that matters is he's this, you know, disruptive void that inserts itself constantly and consistently up into the, the capitalist existence. The hero of The Dark Knight is not Batman, who is willing to fascistically bug every single cell phone, and then we think, oh, heroically, like, gives up that power, right? The fascists never give, the authoritarian capitalist never gives up the power, right? This is ideology at its purest, that he'll be, if we only grant temporary rights, like the Patriot Act, you know, oh, but eventually they'll sunset, eventually this emergency power will disappear, right? But of course we know that it never does. And so Batman and Commissioner Gordon and Harvey Dent are all, and this, again, this is a bit from Zizek, right, want to continue and perpetuate the lie, right? Batman assumes the role as murderer to perpetuate the lie. Harvey Dent cannot be, you know, denigrated in order to perpetuate the lie. Who wants to get rid of all the masks? It's the Joker. And so he's this empty void, which interestingly enough, throughout the film, is constantly revealing to society its mirror message. Lacan said that the other always returns our message, our true message, in its inverted form. And you'll notice, for example, at the final scene where he's on the skyscraper, the terrorists are the hostages, right? And our very system generates and holds hostage the very terrorists who we see as terrorists are in fact hostage. And so in this case, right, although Al-Qaeda, right, and the Palestinians and the shoe bombers and underwear bombers and all of these people, right, appear to us evidently, just as they appear to the police, right, and well, it's only through the good timing of Batman that they're saved and his, you know, keen vision. All of those terrorists are in fact innocents held hostage by a system of police brutality that is more than willing to shoot them at a distance and not engage them. Whereas the doctors, right, the nurses, the elite of Gotham who are held hostage are in fact, right, take the form of the terrorists.